Engine Repair 2 Test 5 from chapters 10 and 11 of the textbook. And this is some engine configuration stuff. All overhead valve engines do what? Do they operate by the two-stroke cycle? Do they use an overhead camshaft? Do they use the camshaft to close the valves, or do they have the valve located in the head?
They use an overhead camshaft.
Now this is a silly question. That's what I'm always talking about. When you're talking about engine configurations, if you call the parts house, they're going to say, is it overhead valve or overhead cam? Okay, now, these, to be perfectly honest, you know, I don't understand why they call them overhead valve, because all of them have valves overhead except something like a flathead, Bridgman Stratton, or some old Continental engine or something. But this one right here is supposed to be D, have a valve located in the head. But wait a minute, aren't the valves located in the head on all engines?
That's what I was saying.
I mean, this is a screwed up deal, man. I mean, what do they call it? I mean, have you ever, I don't know what you ask them whenever they, or do you work the counter?
Yes,
and when they call you, what do you ask them? If it's like there's a 4-liter engine in an Explorer that's got the camshaft in the block, and there's a 4-liter engine in this single overhead cam that's got the a cam on each head, right? Why do they call it single overhead cam if it's got 2 camshafts? Well, because there's only one on each head. See that engine over there that against the door's got 2 camshafts on each head. It's dual overhead cam. Got me?
Oh, okay.
So there you go. So listen. So all of them have the valves in the head. You know, but
that intake will have to come back on.
That's all right. You can do it. You shall not surely die. All right. An Sohc V8 engine has how many camshafts?
2.
There you go. It's what we just said, wasn't it?
Yep.
Single overhead cam V8 engine. It's got to have a camshaft for each head. If it's a V8, you're not going to have. If it's overhead cam and it's a V8, it's got to have at least 2 camshafts. And if it's a single overhead cam, it's going to have one camshaft on each head. Now, the coolant flow through the radiator is controlled by the, somebody say that, thermostat?
The flow, the thermostat stops it, the pump moves it.
Yeah, the pump actually moves it, but when the thermostat is closed, it bypasses, the pump is actually not deadhead, and it's bypassing it, and it typically goes right to the heater core when the thermostat's closed. The first place they want that warm water to go is right to the heater core so you can get some heat quick as you can.
So that's the thermostat, though.
That's the thermostat. That's number 3. That's the thermostat. All right, you got that one there. And torque is expressed in units of, actually, believe it or not, as bad as I hate to say it, that is pound-feet. Sounds kind of dumb, it's counterintuitive. We've said foot-pounds all of our lives, but if you look on that snap-on torque wrench we got out there, it says pound-feet.
That's like a Newton meter.
Yeah, it really is. Well, think about this. How is it written? Ob's foot. Yeah. That's pound-feet. You know, Ob's is pound and foot. If you look at the way it's written, but we'll see LBS-FT and we'll say foot-pounds. We're saying it backwards, but we've always said foot-pounds. I even told one of the guys, he was an ex-Army guy that was in here, and he was saying pound-feet, pound-feet. And I said, that's right. I mean, the book said it's right, but if you go in a shop somewhere and you say pound-feet, they're going to say, this person's a yo-yo.
Yeah,
nobody, you know, but nobody says pound-feet. You know, that's ridiculous. I mean, that may be the right way, you know. Well, you know, he was right, you know. But, a normally aspirated automobile engine loses about blank power per 1,000 feet of altitude. How much power per 1,000 feet of altitude does a normally aspirated automobile engine lose?
Where did you just get to?
5%. Number 6.
You forgot number 5.
Skip 5.
Number 5 is good, though. I actually said what it was. It's actually.
No, we did torque.
Oh, I'm sorry. I read torque. Both of them had the same set of answers, and I just crashed and burned on that one. Sorry about that, guys. 5 is B. Pound-feet per second. How fast can we get this done? That's basically what your horsepower is.
You said, wait a minute, hold on. You said B and then said pound-foot per second.
I meant to say foot-pounds per minute. Well, I guess you could probably, look at that. Why do they say foot-pounds there and pound-feet on the other one?
I don't know. Is it per minute, per
1
second?
PSI.
Well, I guess you could probably, either one would work if you did the math. But let's go with B. That's foot-pounds per minute, yeah.
Okay.
I told you sometimes I'm going to say stuff is wrong, see if you call me down.
5%.
Not this time.
Oh, that's the only reason I did that, because you said it yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. A is at 3%. Who's ever driven a car in the mountains and felt like you were just plumb ashamed of it because it wouldn't hardly pull out of its tracks? That's terrible. You drive a car to the mountains up there, you The thing won't hardly go. So what do they do for altitude modification? How do you modify one to run right at altitude? You got to advance the timing and change the air fuel mixture. Now, most of these engines that we got out here nowadays, because they got they got barometric pressure sensors and all that stuff on them, they're going to actually change the stuff that up to 4,000 feet, and then they're going to have to, you got to actually make some physical modifications on a lot of them. Now, some of them may go beyond that now, I don't know, but things change all the time, so I can't make absolute statements about what things will, what computer systems will and won't do in response to altitude. One cylinder of an automotive 4-stroke cycle engine completes the cycle every how many degrees? 720 degrees is the correct answer on number 7. And number 8, how many rotations of the crankshaft are required to complete each stroke of a 4-stroke cycle engine? Each stroke. Everybody like that answer that Bobby came out with over there? Everybody like that? Is there anybody that don't like that? That's 1/2. Okay, here's a little story. I got to stop there now and tell you a story. And some of y'all, I don't think anybody's heard this story. Donnie's over here in the next service bay, and he's working on this little V6 Merkur, which was a strange little German-made Ford that they used to come out with. You remember the Merkur? You ever seen the little funky little thing? It had a little 2.8 in it. And I heard him over, he pushed it in, came in on a hook, and he's fooling with it, trying to get it to start. Can't get it to start, fooling with it and checking it and spark, fuel pressure, all this kind of stuff. And he comes over there. 2 heads are always better than one. I don't care who you are, no man is an island. So he comes over and he says, what do you think about this? If you're watching from a distance, sometimes you can come up with the answer. And when they're too close to it, when you're too close to it, you can't see as good as somebody that's... And I told him, take half the spark plugs out of it. Take 3 of the spark plugs out of it. And try to start it with 3 of the spark plugs out of it. What are you talking about? I said, just try it, man. It ain't going to cost you anything. He said, pull 3 of the plugs out. So he pulled 3 of the plugs out. He started it up. It sounded like a machine gun. He said, well, what the heck does that mean? I said, it means your exhaust is stopped up. That's what it means. I don't even remember where I learned that at. But ages before that, I had run into that situation before. And he said, it's got compression, it's got fuel, it's got spark, it's in time, and the doggone thing won't start. I ain't got a clean plug now. I said, take half the plug out. So, he took the exhaust off the catalytic converter, stopped slam up. It stopped up so bad it wouldn't start. So keep that in mind. If you got somebody over banging their head against the wall, tell them to pull half the plugs out and see if it'll start. And what we got to lose? You know what I'm saying? If it fires up that way, you're done. Because it's actually letting, you got a half size of it, it's letting the pressure got somewhere to go. You can also pull the oxygen sensor out. And the one in front of the catalyst, and if it'll fire up then, you got a pretty good idea, see? Or you can drop the exhaust, and sometimes that's a pain. But it's a little easier to screw the oxygen sensor out there usually. All you got to do is make a place on it. All right, so that was a little story that I told to keep you from getting really bored. Although you may have been really bored anyway. Let's see. A rotating force is called what? 10. That's 9. 10. Technician A says the crankshaft determines the stroke of an engine. Technician B says the length of the connecting rod determines the stroke of an engine. Who's right about that? Are y'all confused by that question?
I'd say it's the crankshaft, A.
Absolutely has to be the crankshaft.
Because the connecting rod doesn't have anything to do with stroke.
It actually will change the connecting rod. Can change the compression ratio, but it's not going to change the stroke. It changes the position of the piston. It can make it be lower, stop farther from the head, but it's not going to change the stroke. The stroke can only be affected by the crankshaft, the length of that crankshaft. And the over square versus under square, you know what I'm talking about? If the bore's bigger than the stroke is how far the piston travels, the bore's how big around it is. If the bore's bigger than the stroke, it's under square. If the bore's smaller than the stroke, it's over square. So that's basically, people talk about that all the time. Gearheads used to talk about that all the time when I was, always. And you hear some Joe Gearhead talking about his 3-angle valve job. You ever heard all that? Every valve job is a 3-angle valve job. It just sounds good, All right, so let me see here. Technician A says the 4 strokes of the 4-cycle are intake, compression, power, and exhaust. Is he right?
Yep.
Technician B says most engines rotate clockwise as viewed from the flywheel end of the engine.
I got to get behind. Okay, don't It's rotating two to the right.
If you're standing there looking at the front of the engine, it's rotating clockwise. On most engines, not on all of them.
Okay.
If you're standing there looking, if you're sitting in the rear, it's turning counterclockwise.
Counterclockwise.
If you're driving a Mitsubishi or a Honda Civic, the darn thing turns counterclockwise from you're standing there looking at the pulleys. Because which way is it in the car? The pulley, the timing belt's on the left end of the motor in those Mitsubishi, like a Dodge Stealth and the Mitsubishi 3000 and some of them other one. If the timing belt is on the driver's side of the engine is going to turn counterclockwise. If the timing belt is on the other side of the engine, or if it's a front wheel drive car, it's going to turn, looking at the engine, it's going to turn clockwise. Sitting in the car, it's going to turn counterclockwise. If it's a Corvair, it turns the opposite direction. In other words, a Volkswagen, when you were standing there looking at the engine with the deck lid open, it turns to the right, but a Corvair turned to the left. Corvair is a horizontal opposed air-cooled 6-cylinder that Chevrolet had, in the cars. My dad, somebody would bring him a Corvair to work on at his foreign car garage. And the guy says, "Can you work on my Corvair?" He says, "Well, it's summertime and I'll have to do it with the doors closed." And the guy said, "Why do you have to do it with the doors closed?" He goes, "Because if somebody sees me working on that, they'll bring me a nud." But anyway, he drove a Corvair for a while. My first car that I drove legally was a Corvair. Yeah, it was a 63 Corvair. Yeah. Well, most of them, no. A is the only guy that's riding that one. The volume in the cylinder above the piston, when the piston is at the bottom of the stroke, compared to the volume in the cylinder above the piston when the piston is at the top of the stroke, is referred to what?
Compression ratio.
Compression ratio is a good answer for that question. Number 13, all these can happen when engine compression is lower than normal except A, low power, B, easier engine cranking, D, harder to crank engine, or C, poor fuel economy.
D.
That's basically going to be, the D is it's going to be easier to spin the engine when the compression's low. Now, sooner or later, some of you guys are going to run into a situation. Do you know what an engine sounds like spinning over when it has jump time? I'm talking about when the camshaft is jump time. You know what it sounds like? Have you ever heard one? What is it supposed to sound like? You're supposed to hear even squeezing of air on every cylinder. You're supposed to hear. Now, how many of you guys were listening to that white Ford pickup that we're putting the engine in when Webb was checking the compression on it? He had the compression gauge in it and everything, and it was going, and one of the cylinders wasn't squeezing air. And when it was supposed to be squeezing air, it didn't have any resistance, and it would pick up speed, while that one was supposed to be compressing air. See, because we had a problem with that one. But if you hear one, if somebody pulls up out there, or you hear them trying to start it, and the compression sounds really uneven, like it's not going run. Anyway, you got just jump time. You ain't got no compression on a bunch of the cylinders. By listening to it, you can tell. Just listening. I see, like for instance, if somebody pulls up here and they shut off the car and it's skipping when they pull up, and they pull up and they go in the video warehouse or whatever, and then they come out and you happen to be listening, when they spin it over, if it goes, the reason that cylinder is misfiring is because it's got low compression. All you have to do is listen. You see? You got me? Now, there are some things you can't tell. Like when my wife asked me what was that car that started up out in the neighborhood, and I said it's a 2004 Dodge with a V6, and it's got a little random misfire on cylinder number 2. I can't tell, or I can smell it and tell that it's running rich on the left bank or whatever. Can't tell that, but you can listen, and you can tell when one's got low compression, on one cylinder. And that'll help you, Webb, with your diagnosis. If you're supposed to go out here and find out what's wrong with this car, as soon as you spin it over, if you sound like you got low compression, the first thing I'm going to do is pop the plugs out, all of them, screw the compression gauge in, check all the compression. You're supposed to have your gas pedal all the way to the floor when you're checking compression so it can get all the air it can. Anyway, but just make sure you keep that in mind. This is a troubleshooting thing. It helps you find out what's wrong. And don't give, if the guy at the parts house, if you give them too much information, they'll think that, they'll try to hang something on you if they go and tell you to do, if they do what you said and they come back. If I'm answering a question from on my website, if I mention any parts don't care what it is. I mean, I'm not saying this part's bad. If I mention a part, if I put the name of a part in there, they rush straight to the parts house and they buy the part. First thing they do, they rush to the parts house and they buy a part. And then they want to come back and say, hey, that didn't fix this. I didn't tell you to replace the mass airflow sensor. I told you it's probably not reporting because there's some unmetered air getting in there. I didn't tell you to replace that part. You know, but some people are just like that. Okay, I kind of got sidetracked. Let me see, what number are we on? 16. Technician A says power is the rate of doing work. Technician B says as horsepower increases, the time required to do work increases.
We're on 13.
Were we on 13?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that was basically number D is the right answer to 13. I'm sorry. You're right. Chemical energy in fuel is converted to heat by the burning of the fuel at a control rate. This is 14. The chemical energy in the fuel is converted to heat by the burning of the fuel at a control rate. That's called combustion. It's not a hard question. The diameter of a cylinder is called bore. It's an easy one too. Technician A says power is the rate of doing work. Technician B says horsepower increases. The time to do work increases. That's A. Technician A says the engine size is called displacement and represents the volume displaced or swept by all of the pistons. He's right, isn't he? Is he?
Yeah.
Is he right? Okay. Technician B says engine power is expressed in horsepower and is based on the amount of torque or twisting force the engine produces. Both of those guys are right. A DOHC, dual overhead camshaft, V8 engine uses how many camshafts?
4.
Got to have 4 camshafts if it's dual overhead cam and there's 2 heads on there. On a dynamometer, horsepower is calculated by which of these formulae? Torque equal RPM times 5252. Torque times RPM, stroke times bore times 55. Stroke times bore times 3300.
A.
That's going to be A. Okay. Which of these components determines the engine stroke? Crankshaft. That was a sort of a double dipping question. How is diesel fuel ignited in a warm diesel engine?
Compression.
Yeah, 2 degrees of temperature for every pound of compression. Okay. Now then, which type of diesel engine produces less noise?
IDI.
Anybody else know? What do you think? That's IDI, indirect injection. Now, what does that mean? What is IDI?
It injects it to a little port before it gets drawn in the cylinder.
A little cavity in there, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so instead of squirting it right in there. Which diesel injection system requires the use of a glow plug?
Is that the direct injection or is that the IDI?
Well, I don't like that question, and I'll tell you why I don't like that question.
No.
It's actually C on the right answer key, but direct injection, which is like your Ford Power Stroke and your Duramax, they've got glow plugs.
Yeah.
They do. The Cummins diesel engine doesn't use glow plugs. It uses a sort of a manifold heater grid thing. But both, I mean, see, that's not a good question. It's a bad question. I don't even know why they put it in there, because both A and C are right, and even Common Rail B, you know, the Duramax is a Common Rail system, and it's got glow plugs too. I mean, so what in the assembly are they thinking about? Now, some of them have got little manifold heaters and glow plugs to keep it from white smoking. Number 24, the 3 phases of diesel ignition include what? Anybody know? Ignition delay, rapid combustion, and controlled combustion. That's number D. You must mesmerize that now, don't forget it. Actually, memorize is the right word for that. What fuel system component is used in a vehicle equipped with a diesel engine that is not usually used on the same vehicle when it's equipped with a gasoline engine?
That's going to be a water fuel separator.
Yeah, that's water fuel separator. You don't usually have it on a gas burner. The diesel injection pump is usually driven by what?
Gear off the camshaft.
Yeah, the gear off the camshaft. And interestingly enough, those Duramax diesels, you know, particularly the early ones, I'm not so up on the brand new ones, but the earlier ones let the injector pump draw the fuel out of the gas tank. And I never really liked that. That's a Bosch thing. You know what I mean? The injector pump's going to create a little bit of vacuum, and it's got to pull the fuel. Well, what does that do? if you've got any kind of an air leak between the gas tank and the injector pump, it's going to pull air in there, isn't it? Got me? Because if you're creating low pressure with your pump, and an atmospheric pressure has to push the fuel in there, if there's any kind of breach in that fuel line, you're going to have issues with air getting in there, and it's going to run bad. If the return line is clogged, it'll make air. It whips it up into a foam and all that kind of thing. There was a barge that was coming around. It came all the way from Alaska all the way down the coast of California through the Panama Canal, came up there to that port where we were at Sabine Pass. And this guy that I worked with named Leroy went out there, and they said everybody in every major port has looked at this little engine we've got here on this barge, and nobody can make it run right. And can you have a look at it for us? And he got up there, and he was there for about 10 minutes, and he came off, and it was running. And I said, what did you have to do to fix that engine after nobody else could figure it out? He said, well, the hold of that barge is full of diesel. And somebody, instead of having to fill this little fuel tank up all the time, they just figured they would drop the hose down in the, put a long hose on it and drop it down in the hold. And it could just run all the time, This big old barge hold thousands gallon diesel. He said the only problem is they still had to return going into the tank. And the tank actually had a, pipe cap on it of sorts. And so it couldn't do it. When the tank got full, it was like having a restricted return line. He says, so all I did was hook it back up to the regular tank. You could either let it return into the hold, but see, the return, the fuel that it doesn't use has got to go out the return. It's got to go somewhere. If it ain't got where to go, then it ain't going to run right and all that. And so basically, he just looked at it in a different way than everybody else did. They were looking at the injector pump and all this other kind of stuff, and he was looking at fuel supply. So keep that in mind. Fuel supply is important. Like what's going on with your Bronco, right? Bronco's not going to start because you got the lousy fuel supply. Got 10 pounds of fuel pressure or something. All right. Now then, let's see. Which diesel system supplies high pressure diesel fuel to all the injectors all the time?
Common rail.
High pressure common rail. Which vehicles have that? All right. Name me one vehicle that has high pressure common rail. Duramax does, that's right. They were one of the first domestic pickup that had high pressure common rail. What about the little Volkswagen that Daniel was changing the oil in? The diesel Volkswagen the other day? It's a 09 Jetta. It has common rail injection on it. The 2005 Jeep Liberty that they only made diesel in that 1 year in that Jeep Liberty, it was a common rail system. And that was that 1 year they made it. I kind of wanted one of those things, but it's hard to find one because they only made them 1 year. And then there was the 6.4 liter Power Stroke has common rail injection. That's the new way of doing things, having the common rail. And you know how high the pressure goes on those things? It varies a little bit from one vehicle to the other, but it's like 24,000 pounds of pressure. Now I'm telling you that for a reason. If you happen to be fooling with one of those things that's got common rail injection and you think you're going to crack a fuel line to see if something's going on, or even on this Duramax they got a little Schrader valve thing so you can bleed the air out and pump the fuel filter deal. If that thing's got, like on the Duramax, if the little pressure control solenoid there at the pump is disconnected, and the pressure goes wide open. Now on the old Power Stroke, they had the high pressure oil. If you unplug that one, it bottomed out, but it goes different directions. So if let's say that you got a problem and you think maybe there's got air in there, and you take your screwdriver and you stick it in there, then if you got 23,500 pounds of pressure in there, whatever that Duramax has, I taught some classes on that, and it hits you, and that diesel comes shooting out of there with that kind of pressure and hits you in the hand, you shall surely die. It's got enough pressure to cut your finger slam off. So just be real careful around them common rails. They actually, you've got a sensor that you can read with a scan tool that can tell it. But they also have to have that fuel cooled. There's a fuel cooler on those too. All right. Let me see here. Let me see. Glow plugs should have high resistance when blank and higher resistance when what? 28D. This is a glow plug right here. Okay. All right. I need some juice up here. Somebody give me some juice. Give me some juice. Let me see that. Now this is a sort of a dicey thing here. I'm going to use some juice. I need 2 jumper wires. I got a yellow one up here and a black one, so maybe that's all I need. Alright, so I'm going to heat this glow plug up, and I'm going to let you see a glow plug get hot. Now I'm putting my glasses on because what they tell us is, and I've never seen this happen, that the tip of a glow plug can explode if you put juice to it. You know, like this. Have you ever seen anything explode? It's not pretty. Okay, you got it? You ready? I'm going to heat it up. There it goes. It's red.
It starts.
There. How about that? Now, you can actually measure, I'm talking to you, Webb, measure the current that all the glow plugs are pulling, and you can tell, if you know what it is on a good one, you can tell if you got a bad glow plug, because these glow plug is usually, the ones that I'm familiar with, like this one, will pull 25 amps whenever they're cold, and it drops to 15 ounces of heat up. Got me? So what's 25 times 8? 200. So what's 15 times 8? About 125? Right? Or 120 or something like that. Okay, so let's say that I'm hooking up. I hook my inductive clamp around the wire that's feeding all the glow plugs. And then I'm going to fire up let's say you got one that's skipping when it starts up. And I'm going to turn on the key. And if I only see 175 amps, I know one of them glow plugs is bad. I don't know which one it is. But on the newer ones, it monitors the glow plugs and it'll throw you a code telling you got a bad glow plug. Usually tell you which one it is. Okay, so you've seen the glow plug work now. All right. Now then, let me see. I was on glow plug. Technician A says glow plugs are used to help start a diesel engine and are shut off as soon as the engine starts. Technician B says glow plugs are turned off as soon as a flame is detected in the combustion chamber. That's kind of funny. That's D. Actually, for a little bit after the engine fires up, the glow plugs are still glowing. That's called afterglow. Kind of poetically named, you know. Alright, so let me see. What part should be removed to test cylinder compression on a diesel engine?
Glow plugs?
Glow plug or injector. Yeah. Technician A says the diesel engine uses the heat of compression to ignite the diesel fuel. Technician B says direct injection uses a pre-combustion chamber. Well, 31's A only. And Technician A says injector nozzles are either opened by the high pressure pulse from a distributor pump or electrically by the computer on common rail design. Technician B says indirect injection occurs directly into the combustion chamber. 32 is A only. A only. Alright, you got that? Alright, Technician A says diesel engines can be tested using a scan tool to determine a weak or non-functioning cylinder. Technician B says glow plugs can be used to help start a cold diesel engine and help prevent excessive white smoke during warm-up. Which technician is correct?
Is that both of them?
Yeah, they're both right. I built a tool one time when we were working on those Power Stroke diesels when I was at the Ford place, and I actually got a box and I had 8 toggle switches on it, and I hooked it up with some connectors where you could connect it in between the wire harness and the valve cover plug that fed the injectors. And I was gonna, because it was hard to tell sometimes which cylinder was misfiring on them things. You'd know you had a skip, but you didn't know which one it had. So you could flip them. I got it where you could turn the injectors off with this little box I built. And it was still, even doing that, it was a little difficult to tell, you know, because it's kind of hard to unplug those things. But we were able to do it. But Ford, I sent a little thing up to Hickok Tools, you know, or Ford, or whoever it was that was supplying our tool. It might have been Hickok. And they basically said, we're not interested in that. And then about a year later, they came out with one. But it was improved over mine because it was easier to hook up. And furthermore, you could get it up here. If you look at the scan tool stuff on the Fords, it's got some readings that's got volume of fuel desired and mass of fuel desired. And it's, you know, the mass fuel desired, if I remember right, is measured in cubic millimeters and all that. But if you switch off a cylinder, you can watch, and you know, it's kind of like you're wanting to see which one doesn't change it. Click, 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 click. The one that didn't change is the one that skipped it, even though it didn't sound any different. You know, it's just, that's cool for what that's worth. And you can also, listen to this, you can current ramp those injectors and tell which one's skipping that way. And I think Matt's already been doing some of that, you know. But, all right, so just keep that under your hat there, and remember it. Technician A says diesel engines can be tested using a scan tool. Blah, we've already been there. Which of these takes place during regeneration in a diesel particulate filter? That's going to be C. Soot is being burned. Those particulate filters are really a good deal because they don't, they're capturing and getting rid of that soot. 35. A diesel-powered vehicle with a manual transmission is rapidly accelerated in low gear from idle speed to a maximum governed RPM while the smoke emissions are measured. Which of these diesel smoke opacity tests is being performed? Well, no. Rapidly accelerated in low gear from an idle speed to a maximum governed RPM while the smoke emissions are measured. Now they're going to do that basically on a dyno. That's actually B. That's a rolling acceleration test. Rolling acceleration test. What percentage of opacity means the exhaust is so dark that it completely blocks the light? This sounds like some of our emissions test questions, doesn't it? All right. 100%. What percent of opacity means the exhaust has no visible smoke and does not block light from a beam projected through the exhaust smoke? That's actually going to be the D. Diesel engine should produce at least how many psi of compression pressure, and all cylinders should be within 50 psi of each other? Wait a minute, think about a diesel now. Diesel fires on compression. You need a lot of compression. At least 300 pounds. The ones that I used to check would be like 450. What color exhaust smoke most often occurs during cold engine starts because the smoke's usually condensed fuel droplets?
Gray.
It's actually going to be a white smoke. And then 40. Which of these tools is used for checking the diesel injector nozzle for proper spray pattern? Tester. A pop tester. Basically what you do is you got to hook that line up to that injector in that pop tester, and it's put in a little fixture, and you got to spray in a little pan, and you're going to pull this big lever down, and that pressure on that gauge goes up. And when you're going to watch what the pressure is when the injector, pops, and when it pops, it sprays fuel out. And those holes in the tip of that injector are so tiny that they must be cut with a laser or something. You can't even see them. You can look at those holes and try to see them. You can't see them. They're that little. Yeah. But